Okay, we have some breaking news coming in. It looks like a reversal. The European Commission reversing an earlier announcement to suspend all development aid payments to the Palestinian Territories. The aid is worth about 700 million euros. That money will continue to be paid out now. DW correspondent Bernd Riegert, he has been following this story. I mean, this is a 180-degree turnaround, Bernd. Do we know why the decision was made one way and then the decision was made to go the other way?
There was confusion here in Brussels after Oliver Verhely, the Commissioner for Neighbourhood Policy, sent out a message on X this afternoon where he said that all aid would be stopped and no money would flow into the Palestinian territories anymore. Everybody was surprised because tomorrow the foreign ministers actually of all 27 member states will gather to talk about just that, how to react on the terror by the Hamas and how to react with financial means. So in the evening the Commission then said no, Verhely jumped the gun a little bit, he was premature. So far the things will only be checked. The money will flow for old projects, and the ban or this announcement may strike new projects which are planned for next year. And to make it very clear, the humanitarian aid, so food, medical supplies, schoolings for 1.5 million people in Gaza who cannot support themselves, is not concerned. So the EU will pay humanitarian assistance as promised.
And Bernd, we just want to be clear about this money that's coming from the European Union and going to the Palestinians in Gaza. That money is for humanitarian purposes only. How does the European Union ensure that money earmarked for humanitarian purposes is spent on humanitarian purposes and not for terrorism?
Well, you have to keep in mind that since 2008 there are no direct contacts between Hamas, which is running a kind of administration in Gaza, and the European Union. The European Union is funding all the money through international organizations or non-governmental organizations like the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, or most of all the United Nations. So they put the money to these organizations and they then have to disperse the money in Gaza or buy supplies. And the main actor here is a special body of the United Nations, a relief organization, especially for Palestinian refugees, which is working since 1950, the so-called UNRWA. There are 13,000 members of UNRWA in Gaza Strip. They are financed by the EU or also by other countries, also Arab countries, the United States. Everybody's giving money for that. They run schools, they run hospitals, and so they are checking actually where the money goes. And the EU says, we don't pay anything to Hamas, but of course, in an entity like a Gaza Strip, it's very difficult. There's corruption, there's no rule of law, so you can imagine that some money goes somewhere, and also there are audits run by the EU there, so they try at least to keep track of the money. And there's the other path is development aid. This money is earmarked for construction sites or for infrastructure, sewage plants, water supplies and stuff like that. Okay. And this is the money the EU is now talking about that might be held back in the next year.
Our correspondent Bernd Riegert with the 180 reversals tonight coming from Brussels. Bernd, thank you.
Well, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has condemned the Hamas attacks, saying there was no justification for acts of terror. He also raised concerns about the reported death toll in Gaza from Israeli retaliatory strikes.
I recognize the legitimate grievances of the Palestinian people, but nothing can justify these acts of terror and the killing, maiming and abduction of civilians. I reiterate my call to immediately cease these attacks and release all hostages. In the face of these unprecedented attacks, Israeli airstrikes have pounded Gaza. I'm deeply alarmed by reports of over 500 Palestinians, including women and children, killed in Gaza and over 3,000 injured. Unfortunately, these numbers are rising by the minute as Israeli operations continue. While I recognize Israel's legitimate security concerns, I also remind Israel that military operations must be conducted in strict accordance with international humanitarian law.
It's Antonio Guterres. Let's get more from DW Special Correspondent Aya Ibrahim in Washington. Welcome, Aya. Tell us more about what the Secretary-General said.
Well, the Secretary General was, I think, trying to strike a balance when it comes to his comments on this most recent flare-up of violence. He unequivocally condemned the violence conducted by the militant Islamist group Hamas, which is classified as a terror organization by the US, EU, and others, saying that absolutely nothing justifies what they have done in the past couple of days to Israeli civilians. At the same time, he was sure to warn that any kind of military operation taking place in the Gaza Strip has to take place in strict accordance to international law, and that means that civilians must be protected, civilian infrastructure has to be protected, and he warned against the targeting of civilian infrastructure like schools, mosques, or residential buildings. He also said, and I'm quoting now in his speech, that the most recent violence does not come in a vacuum, and he continued, and I'm quoting him now, referring to the 56-year-long occupation that has no political end in sight. So he was also sure to mention from his perspective that this is part of a much longer series of events, and that for the cycle of violence to be stopped, as he said, he also called it the cycle of violence, grievances have to be recognized.
Well, earlier today, America's Deputy Ambassador to the UN reiterated his country's support for Israel and warned about the risk of the conflict escalating. So let's have more then on the US response, please.
Well, since the early hours of this episode, this flare-up of violence, this war, the United States, the Biden administration, has been in close contact with their Israeli counterparts. President Biden has spoken to Prime Minister Netanyahu, reiterating the United States' support for Israel, reiterating that Israel has the right to defend itself, and that the United States will provide Israel with whatever it needs in this hour of need. The United States already gives Israel upwards of $3 billion of military aid annually, but the Biden administration has also signaled its willingness to take on more requests for aid. The Secretary of State has likened what is happening right now in Israel to the 1973 Yom Kippur War, but said that the difference between that war and what we're seeing now is that 1973 was a conventional war with armies, while this is a terror series of terror attacks. The United States has also said that they have warned other actors in the regions not to take advantage of what's going on right now in Israel to advance its own geopolitical interests, and by that they mean factions in the West Bank, Lebanon, and Iran, which is a supporter of Hamas. And they've also moved carriers, aircraft carriers and ships to the eastern Mediterranean, in all likelihood in a move to deter regional actors, and in that case, that regional actor would be Iran.
And as you've speaking, we've been looking at pictures of the night sky over Gaza. Those are live pictures at the moment. In the US, Republicans have laid at least some of the blame for this situation at President Biden's door.
Yes, well, we have to go back a couple of weeks ago. In September, the Biden administration reached a prisoner exchange agreement with Iran. So in exchange for 5 American nationals who were wrongfully held in an Iranian prison, the United States agreed to release $6 billion of Iranian funds, not U.S. money, Iranian funds that had been frozen in a South Korean bank account in accordance with sanctions sanction rules, and in exchange for these 5 Americans, the United States agreed to release these funds. They would be strictly used for humanitarian purposes. Now, fast forward to this crisis, and we have prominent Republicans, most notably former President Donald Trump, saying that there's somehow a connection between what's going on, what Hamas has done, and these funds. But the Biden administration has assured the public that these funds have actually yet to be released. And contrary to what Donald Trump has been saying, that these are U.S. taxpayer dollars, these are not U.S. taxpayer dollars. These are, in fact, Iranian funds that had been frozen. So there is no connection, as far as the United States government is concerned, between what's going on in Israel caused by Hamas and the prisoner exchange agreement. Additionally, the United States has said that there's no evidence to connect Iran with what Hamas is doing right now, contrary to some media reports that we have seen in the past few days.
Of course, close ties between the two countries, political, social, and indeed familial. What's being said about American citizens in Israel, either caught up or indeed taken hostage?
We know, according to U.S. officials, that 9 U.S. citizens have been killed in the violence, and we know that some of the hostages that have been taken back to Gaza, some are believed to be U.S. citizens as well, or dual nationals, but we don't have an exact number on the hostages that have American passports, nor do we have any confirmed reports about where they are potentially held within the Gaza Strip by the Hamas terror group.
Thank you for that, Ibrahim in Washington.
We want to go now to Ralph Stagner. He is a member of Germany's parliament for Chancellor Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats. He's also a member of Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee. Mr. Stagner, it's good to see you again. I'm sure you just heard that interview I did there with the father. Wants to know where his daughter is. She may have been kidnapped by Hamas. What was your reaction when you heard about these attacks on Saturday?
Good evening. This was a real terrible terrorist attack, and it has been a surprise to most of us, although the conflict is there for years and years and years and years. But the crucial brutality of this attack, with so many people having died or injured or suffering, that is really a tragedy, and we have to do everything to support Israel in defending itself against this terrorist attack.
What is your take on Israel's response? A complete blockade of Gaza, no electricity, no food, no fuel to the region, a region, of course, that was already desperately poor.
Well, there are always two sides to that. One thing is that Israel has every right to defend itself against the terrorists. Yet on the other side, the suffering part is on the population, which is in poor shape anyway. And as we know from all the years, that enduring peace in this region will only be there if there is, on one side, security for the state of Israel is guaranteed, and then on the other side that there is a peaceful perspective for the Palestinian people.
Mr. Stagner, I want to ask you about your money, Europe's money. News broke earlier today that the European Union was planning to suspend all of its development aid, financial aid to the Palestinian Authority. We're talking about 700 million euros worth of aid. We just heard in the last hour that the European Union has decided to walk that back, and they are not suspending the payments. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's very important that we don't finance anything that is misused for supporting terrorist attacks. And obviously there is no support of the Palestinian administration or even for Hamas or organizations like that. So that we have to look into that very carefully, that this really doesn't happen. On the other hand, humanitarian aid has been given for good reasons. And as long as it's only humanitarian aid, I think we should not completely give that up. But first and in the moment, I think that's the important thing to do after this very cruel attack, terrorist attack, that we really make sure that no money can be abused to support terrorist structures or anti-Semitism or anti-Israel sentiments or whatever.
Well, can you say that tonight, Mr. Stagner, with certainty? You're on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I mean, Germany has, what, 125 million euros in development aid that goes to the Palestinian territories. Can you say with certainty tonight that none of that money is ever funneled into the hands of Hamas and is used for terrorist purposes?
Well, as far as I know, that hasn't happened, but I think we have methods to look into that. And finance control is a strong instrument we use fairly often, and I think there's a good system to that. Still, in the moment, I think it's very important to take a very close look on all of that, that there hasn't been abuse of that, there hasn't been corruption or whatever that might have led to a use of money that wasn't, as it was our purpose, just giving humanitarian aid. Humanitarian aid to the population is always important and necessary, I would say. But we have to make sure, and we definitely will look into that. But I think that the German system of finance control is a fairly effective one.
Mr. Ralph Stagner, a member of the Social Democrats in the German Parliament and a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Bundestag. Mr. Stagner, as always, we appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, a synagogue here in Berlin has been holding a memorial ceremony and saying prayers for the victims of the Hamas attacks. Israel's ambassador to Germany, Ron Prosser, and Berlin's Mayor Kai Wegner are amongst the government officials and representatives here to show solidarity. And our political correspondent, Emily Gordine, is there as well. Welcome, Emily. Tell us about the service.
Yes, this service was organised by the Jewish Shabbat community in Berlin, and it took place just behind me at the synagogue. And this service was intended to commemorate the victims of the Hamas terrorist attacks in Israel, but it was also a sign of solidarity and support to Israel in times like these. As you mentioned, among the attendees were high-ranking political figures, but also families who have relatives in Israel who are directly affected by what is happening there. And we initially heard quite a few speeches, and all of them echoed really the same thing, that Germany stands with Israel in these times. And in these times, it is also very important to show unity. And that was really quite a very strong message in the speeches here today. And especially from Kai Wegner, the mayor of Berlin, he reiterated time and again that Israel has the right to defend itself and that Germany will stand by it no matter what.
What sort of reaction has there been amongst the German public to these attacks?
Well, especially here in Berlin, yesterday we saw hundreds of people come out to the Brandenburg Gate to show their support, to show their solidarity. That being said, we also did see incidences of pro-Palestinian groups celebrate in the streets a few kilometers away from here. Now, these small celebrations were stopped by the Berlin police, and Kai Wegner, the mayor of Berlin, here at this service again said that anti-Semitism has no space in Germany. It has no space, it has no place in the streets of Berlin. And as a result, we are also seeing higher police presence in the streets, not just in the streets, but also in front of Jewish buildings. All of this intended really to show that Jews will be safe in this country.
Because Berlin and indeed Germany has seen an increase in anti-Semitic attacks over the years.
Yes, that's true. We saw the attack in Halle at a synagogue a few years ago. That was really quite shocking, and it led to a lot of debate in Germany that Jewish buildings, Jewish sites need to be protected further. And I mean, we saw in London now, I think recently, that the windows of a kosher restaurant were broken in. They were smashed with a rock, and outside somebody had sprayed Free Palestine. I think this is also very much a reminder that now Germany will have to look very carefully at what is going on in the streets of this country to make sure that Jewish life is protected. The Federal Commissioner for Jewish Life, Mr. Klein, was here as well today, and he emphasized that feeling time and again, that it is Germany's historic responsibility to Israel and to the Jewish people following the Holocaust, you know. So I think this will be Germany will take this seriously from what I've heard today, and that's what we are going to look at going forward.
Thanks for that, Emily. Emily Gordine in Berlin.